Hi, everybody. Good morning. There we go. Good stuff. Hi, everybody. Hi, live from a little cubicle in Frankfurt Airport. Isn't this exciting? I'm in Frankfurt. I love Frankfurt. You can even see my luggage. That's nice. Yeah. What's up, everybody? How you doing? Oh, wow. What a week. I am in Frankfurt. I'm beginning my little spring boot Western European. Well, I don't think does Serbia count as Western Europe? I don't know if it does. Whatever, European tour. Okay, let's just call it that. I'm doing a small, very small European tour, introducing Spring Boot 3 to the world here in Europe. I'll be here until the 22nd, and I'm starting my journey. I'm in a layover in Frankfurt, fairly exhausted. Didn't get a lot of sleep, if I'm honest, on the flight. But I'm going to be doing a layover here, and then I'm off to Athens, Greece for Devox Greece. That'll be fun. And I figured since I've hey, not too far away from Vienna. Okay, look, Johnny, buddy, we can't tell people about Vienna. That we can't. You just can't do that. Okay, like it's got to be our little secret. I love Vienna, and I would be very sad if all the tourists just started ruining it. Please don't just shh. It's our little secret, okay? That place is it's amazing. Yeah, I wish I was stopping in Vienna. Austria is great, but Vienna is something else. That's a city in the world. One of the best, one of the all-time most beautiful cities I've ever been in. Just phenomenal. Mm. Well, anyway, hi from Vienna. Hello from wherever you all are joining. I don't know. I'm just glad you're here. Thanks for joining. So, friends, I've got a lot of stuff I want to look at today. I figured we could just go through it together for the next hour or whatever. I don't know. Who knows how long I've got? When do I have to leave? 10? Oh, yeah, about an hour. Yeah, let's call it an hour. Okay, so do. All right. So there's some cool stuff happening. I thought I'd start with this blog. I wanted to just kind of go through this and we'll just talk about a bunch of stuff, right? I work on the Spring team, but I am a developer advocate. So this is an interesting point because as a developer advocate, I don't know what I'm doing. I have no idea. I don't know what it means to be good at this job, and the reason I don't know what it means to be good at this job is because I'm just kind of making it up, right? I don't know. I joined the Spring team in 2010, and like I was an engineer before, right? Like an actual pure all day engineer, and then this really nice human being who makes mistakes because we're all fallible, right? We all make mistakes. This guy named Adam Fitzgerald, he hired me, right? And I'm a big Adam Fitzgerald fan. You should be a big Adam Fitzgerald fan. He's awesome. But he hired me. So we all make mistakes. We all slip up, and I owe my career thus far to his slipping up, right? So I saw this article. He was in it. They interviewed him on this. What success looks like for modern open source software startups. Now, Adam Fitzgerald. Let me tell you about him a little bit because I feel like it's useful to set the stage. And by the by, if you're looking for a job in developer relations, DevRel, whatever, yeah, please just come on in. The water's fine. It's a great industry, right? It's an amazing time because remember, as more and more of us are working on technologies that have a cloud component or a software as a service component, increasingly, the more and more of us are working on developer-facing technologies, right? And if it's developer facing, then of course you need somebody to help advocate for that, right? That's what developer relations is all about. And it's not just a one-way thing either. It's a two-way thing. So you need somebody to advocate on behalf of the user who are using that technology, whatever it is, and you need something to help somebody to help advocate for the technology to the community, right? So I started doing this back in 2010, and again, I had a few role models. I've talked at length on this show about how James Ward is and was one of my biggest role models. But I don't know what I'm doing. I still don't. I still look up to him. I look up to people like him, and Dr. Venkat Subramaniam, and you know, and Matt Rabel. I mean, these are all people that have just been doing it for so much longer at such high levels that you know, it takes the stress away because I don't ever have to worry about being number one. It'll never happen. I don't. There's no competition because there's no point. I could no more be number one developer advocate than I could become a bird and fly. It's just the physics aren't there. The essential nature of it all is just not going to work out in my favor. And that's been very good. It takes away a lot of the stress. So anyway, Adam, he worked at BEA, right? Anybody here remember BEA? BEA was a big middleware company that Oracle bought up back in like 2008 or 7 or something like that. They had WebLogic, right? They had WebLogic. They had Aqualogic for like workflow stuff. They had a bunch of like middleware, right? And then Oracle bought it up, and then Oracle was at one point, yeah, Dr. Venkat, the GOAT, exactly, the greatest of all time. Damn right. I love Dr. Venkat. He's just the best. So he worked at BEA, and BEA had middleware, things like you spelled Venkat wrong, but I'm with you. I know what you're saying, Dr. Venkat. So there was BEA middleware, right? Web server, the application server called WebLogic, all this stuff. And then, hi, Amit. Good to see you, man. How are you? Welcome, everybody, to the show. Morning, Zaizu. Very good. Thanks for joining. So Oracle bought that company, and they got all this great middleware. WebLogic back in the day was a really amazing, like, base application server, right? It was awesome. But obviously, now there's no such thing as a good application server. It just makes no sense, right? But if you had to choose an application server and you couldn't use Tomcat, then yeah, I would have chosen something like WebLogic. It was awesome. So Adam, hello, hi, Nihar. Thanks for joining us. I appreciate you. So Adam was the community person over at BEA, and then the Spring team hired him to come do community stuff for the Spring team when they were at Spring Source, and then the company got acquired, and they had some money. And the Spring team, to their credit, they were advocates and engineers, because you can't just write great code in the basement and then hope that people will come and use your stuff. That's not how it works. You've got to go out there and engage in the war of ideas. You've got to participate. You can't win if you're not in it, right? And so, to the extent that a technology succeeds, it's because it inspires people. It ingratiates itself in people's hearts and minds, right? So, and a huge part of that is this dynamic that hopefully a connection with another human being can inspire. So that's the essence of developer relations. So when the Spring team was small, the engineers, including the biggest engineers, the Rod Johnsons and the Jürgen Hollers and all that, all of them were, let's say 40% developer advocate and 60% engineer. They had to be out there doing that. But then when they hired me, the basic way they explained it to me was you'd be 60% advocate and then 40% engineer, because I'm an engineer. And it seemed like a pretty good deal to me. And that was Adam. That was Adam Fitzgerald. And he's not a developer, right? I mean, he understands developers, but he's not a developer. So when I joined, he had this giant calendar, which is, I didn't even know what I was looking at first. I knew what a calendar looks like, and Outlook or Zimbra or whatever, but his calendar was just all colors. There was no white anywhere. I was like, what am I looking at? He's like, this is my calendar, Josh. What? Where do you sleep? Is there time for sleep? What is this? It made no sense. And I was just, so he was one of those people that just came in and worked, 7 to 7 every day. The guy was not, he didn't take a penny home that he didn't earn 10 times over, right? He gave far more than he ever took. And he was one of those amazing professionals. And I thought when I joined, oh, okay, great, I can take some of this work from him and help him, do the work he's doing, make it easier for him. No. He didn't need help with that. He already had that under control. He needed help with this other page of stuff that just wasn't getting done, right? For every day of activity, there's all the stuff that he accepted and was going to do and meetings he was going to be in. But there was another page of stuff he's just like, I can't, there's no time. So that was like, oh, okay. So now you understand. Adam Fitzgerald, consummate professional, truly understood what it meant to run and nurture communities. Just one of the most brilliant people I've ever had the privilege of working for. And he was my first boss on the spring team. And he's the first in a string of amazing bosses. I've never had a bad boss, but he was, up until that point in my life, he was the best boss I ever had. And I've had 4 equally brilliant, amazing, inspiring bosses since, which is rare. Most people would be very lucky to have just one boss of that caliber, but I've had 4 in a row. Okay, so anyway, after he left the spring team, he took a demotion. He went to this nascent startup called AWS. Who's gonna use that? So he went to AWS and he became the big cheese advocate over there. And then what did he do after? I guess after that he went to HashiCorp, which is where he is right now. So that's the backdrop. Okay, that's my hero and friend Adam Fitzgerald, and he's in this article, and I want to just kind of like read it with y'all because I just haven't talked to him in a while. He's really smart. It's always a good idea to read from him and to learn from him. So this is an article on heavybit.com. And it says what success looks like from modern open source software startups, right? And he works for HashiCorp. HashiCorp are, they make the cool cloud infrastructure, things like Console and Nomad and, just Vault and all these things, and Terraform, all these things I'm sure that you know, and that are respectively in the categories that they serve, basically de facto standards that are leaders in their spaces. Okay, so Joseph Ruscio, general partner at HeavyBit. What is HeavyBit? Is that an investor? What is HeavyBit? Are they leading investor and developer first startups? Oh, cool. Very cool. So, how open source startups succeed. Estimates suggest that modern developers have built about 70 to 90%. And by the way, if you have Nomad product like Kate, Nomad is a cloud kind of like Kubernetes. It's awesome. I mean, there's not a bad technology at HashiCorp. It's a company built by nerds for nerds, and it's just, you can see it, right? Everybody in the company understands and feels the pains that developers feel, and they build amazing solutions. Sort of separate from the nonsense. There's no golf games, when you use HashiCorp. They're just a good, amazing company. Hey, hi, good to see you. Thanks. Good afternoon. I don't know what time zone it is for you, but it's afternoon. It's 12:01 right now, so that's neat. Okay, so anyway, estimates suggest that modern developers have built about 70 to 90% of all modern software on top of open source projects. Is that true? Do we think that's true? That sounds about right, doesn't it? But it's sort of like 70 to 90%. That feels right. But again, if you had asked me about that 20 years ago, I think that number would have been much lower, right? Like even if for no other, like let's say that the rest of the community was already on board open source 20 years ago. People forget .NET and Java were not open source 20 years ago, right? Java wasn't open source until 2005, 6, 7, 8, something like that, right? So it's, the whole enterprise just recently became open source in the last decade and a half. So yeah, okay. So 70 to 90%, I guess that's a pretty good number. It's a huge margin of error there, 20%, right? Of all modern software on top of open source projects. Not a surprising figure considering how many crucial aspects of modern software infrastructure depends on free open source software for operating systems like Linux, the server, Apache, the database, MySQL, web browser, Firefox, or Chrome, or whatever, and even mobile, Android. So, and actually even iOS, right? It's built on the Mock kernel, BSD Mock kernel, which I think is open source, right? There's a lot of open source. You can't escape it today. So for those looking to start a new technical project or startup, is open source just a straightforward, better path to success? Not necessarily. There are key differences between open source or proprietary projects. And while there are specific benefits of open source software for startups, there are increasingly important nuances that startup founders and investors need to consider. Okay, go on. Yes, startups must absolutely continue to uphold the basic tenets of OSS projects, including the foundational requirement of building a robust community and intelligently selecting the license that best suits their needs. Um, so they're saying that if you're going to be a startup and you're going to do it in open source, which um, it's a common choice, right? You can make money in open source, but the question is, how do you do it? They're saying if you want to do it, you have to meet the requirements of open source projects, including building a community, and you have to choose a license that works with that goal, right? Okay, so sensible. You may, and remember, there's a whole debate in the industry right now around open core versus other licensing models, and all these, like, you know, people are trying to rebuff cloud vendors like Amazon, or something like that. And they have this sort of tension around that, right? So let's see. However, OSS startups differ from traditional proprietary software startups in the way that they scale and cross the chasm, right? This is the what is the etymology of that? Cross the chasm is software's eating the world, right? Crossing the chasm. Okay. Is a marketing book by Jeffrey Moore that examines the market dynamics faced by innovative new products, which with a particular focus on the chasm or adaptation gap that lies between early and mainstream markets. Okay. So how do you go from like early enthusiasts to like just the mainstream that everybody uses, right? And if you can cross that chasm, that's basically success. Okay. Into enterprise sales. So how do you go from OSS, like an open source project like Spring was, to a thing that's now the core beating heart of all your enterprise sales motions, right? And all OSS startups need to be aware of emerging issues around licensing defensibility, infrastructure dependencies, and liability. So they asked Adam Fitzgerald, my guy, HashiCorp's vice president of developer relations, on how to build and scale a successful open source startup, and he shared his insights below. Learn the latest insights directly from the leading voices in open source software and tech VC by joining the Dev Guild open source event. That looks fun. Where is it? Can I go? Like, do I have to be special or smart? Ah, son of a gun, it's today. No, it's all gone. I missed it. Oh, there's Adam right there. There he is, smiling guy. I miss him. He's cool. Well, it looks like it would have been fun, but it's today. It's probably not happening in Frankfurt, which is where I am right now. So, okay, biggest change in open source software. What has been the biggest change in open source software development over the years that startups need to be aware of today? Okay, I think one of the biggest news items in the world of open source is all the discussion around what it means to use an Elastic-like SSPL license. Okay, and this is what I was talking about earlier. This is a license that, Elastic drew a lot of flack. Basically, they moved to relicense their code to be dual licensed under the Elastic license and server-side public license, giving users the choice of which license to apply. We are simplifying the Elastic license and making it substantially more permissive. This licensing change ensures our communities and customers have free and open access to use, modify, redistribute, and collaborate on the code. It also protects our continued investment in developing products that we distribute for free and in the open by restricting cloud services. That's Amazon, right? This is they're the most egregious offender here, is Amazon, from offering Elasticsearch and Kibana as a service without contributing back. So they're saying, like, look, you can't just take our code, fork it, and then run it as a service. You got to like give your forks and your changes back to the open source project. And if you're going to make money, especially that, and I think that seems fairly reasonable, right? So, yeah. Okay, so that's and a lot of companies have done this as well. A lot of other ones, right? Similar licenses, similar changes, similar motivations. They're all trying to take the power away from these cloud vendors that just take and don't give back. Okay, so the background for nearly all of it is, quote unquote, if I built something in open source, how do I prevent a large cloud provider from just taking my open source and making it run for them and then selling it as a profitable service? Specifically, the actions from players such as Elastic and MongoDB in particular are what have caused the shakeup. And then you have the reaction to how those licenses aren't actually approved by the OSI, right? The open source, the arbiter of all open source licenses, basically, right? So here's a good point. I want to read this for a minute here. The SSPL is not an open source license. We've seen that. Wow, that's the opensource.org. You're not doing great if they come out with a blog saying, "Hey, it's not actually open source." Just so you know, we have seen that several companies have abandoned their original dedication to the open source community by switching their core products from an open source license, one approved by the Open Source Initiative, to a faux pin. Get it? False open faux pin. A portmanteau. Okay, so to the faux pin source license. The hallmark of a faux pin license is that those who have made the switch claim that the product continues to remain open under the new license, but the new license actually takes away users' rights. The license du jour is a server-side public license. The license was submitted to the Open Source Initiative for approval, but later withdrawn by the license steward when it became clear that the license would not be approved. Open source licenses are the foundation for the open source software ecosystem, a system that fosters and facilitates the collaborative development of software. Open source licenses allow a user to view the source code, but do not allow other highly important rights protected by the open source definition, such as the right to make use of the program for any field or endeavor. By design, and as explained by the most recent adopter, Elastic, in a post unironically titled "Doubling Down on Open," which is, it's not open, they're saying, right? Okay, so Elastic says that now it can restrict cloud service providers from offering our software as a service in violation of OST 6. Elastic didn't double down, it threw its cards in. So, okay. I think both things can be true. I think it can be true that it's not open source, it's not OSI approved, but also one feels for Elastic and MongoDB and these other companies that are doing all the work and footing the bill for all the R&D and getting none of the profits back, right? Hello, Chris. Hello. Welcome. So yeah, I don't have a, I don't know how to reconcile that, but we need to do something. We can't just let cloud vendors just sap these infrastructure providers, right? Okay, so there's been this big seismic shift I've seen in open source for commercial business models in the last 15 years. Speaking not just from my role in developer relations at HashiCorp, but also from my personal opinion, I think people need to take a long, hard look at why they're using open source license. Okay, and if you're trying to build a business, then you need to understand what you're trying to do with that open source license and what sort of trade-offs you have once you pick one. In my opinion, picking an open source license for a tool is a one-way door, okay? That's a great point, right? If you choose a license, you can't walk that back, right? You've got to just imagine if Spring, we went GPL 3 or something tomorrow, right? That's not going to work. That just doesn't work. It has to stay the way it is. It's, and we are zealous about keeping Spring Apache 2 licensed and making it as open as possible. And we have been for the entirety of the 20 plus odd years or whatever of Spring, right? And yeah, there's it's just an amazing thing. We really, really, really keep Spring open. It's so important to us. The engineers push back if there's anything that might even be perceived as not being open, right? Even though it might be, we are very sort of it's gotta be. And even I sometimes go, we could probably do that. That's not actually not open. It just also has the tangible benefit of maybe making us some money. But the Spring team, and me too, I'm with them. They're very, very sort of, no, it's got to be open source, right? And this is why people trust them. It's because it's been open source and it will stay open source. Okay. In my opinion, picking an open source license for a tool is a one-way door. When you go through it and you make that license choice, you're basically making the commitment to a huge number of people that are relying on you for that license. Any license change downstream is a huge, it's a huge trust breaker for developers and technical end users. Is that true? So, okay, what would you do if your favorite open source project, like Elastic, or what if it was a non-infrastructure project like React or something, or Angular, I don't know, whatever. What if it was some other, what if jQuery changed the license suddenly? I don't know if anybody's using jQuery, but something that you intend to maintain. What would your thinking be on uh, that suddenly suddenly changing? Everything before would still be the old license, of course. You can't put that genie back in the bottle. But what about everything hence? Um, would it be a deal breaker for you? What if they move to this server-side public license or something like it, where it restricted your rights? What are your thoughts on that? Okay, um, so let's see. That's not to say that there aren't options when it comes to creating a business model with a permissive license that is still open source. But you have to be really clear about what you're trying to do. And I think in some cases that there's probably too little thought applied at the early stages of an open source project when people are just sort of starting to build developer tools, especially coming from a hobbyist background before looking to pivot to some kind of business model. Very good point, right? Like all the good projects that we all use today started as hobbyist projects that people just sort of did um, under their own steam, resources, time, and whatever, and that eventually took on a life of their own, right? And there's not necessarily a discussion around how to monetize that in the beginning. So you got to be careful with that license. You got to keep your cards close to your vest in some ways, but you have to also not license yourself out of a revenue model, if it's plausible somehow. Okay, so with so much modern software infrastructure built on open source software, what do startups need to know about managing liabilities and dependencies? It's all about the software supply chain in a general sense, right? So you know what a supply chain is, right? SBOMs and things like that. Or maybe he's just talking about like the fatty, the conveyor belt that people have in the software development process. If you're working on an OSS project, you need to understand what your dependency model is. Where are your vulnerabilities? No, he's talking about an SBOM. Okay. I always think of that one great XKCD cartoon, the big pile of bricks. Yeah, this is real. This is real, people. Are you all investigating SBOMs, and do you have that integrated into your pipeline? Because it's such an important thing now. Jurisdictionally, statutorily, it's an important thing, right? If you are in certain jurisdictions, like in Europe, I think there's now, especially if you're doing business with the government, that's what it is. If you're doing business with the government in certain jurisdictions, you need to be able to speak to where your dependencies are and the provenance of them, and that they are as up to date as possible, right? And so Stephen Poole and Justin Riak and I had a great discussion on this very channel about that just a few weeks or months ago. I don't know. It was in DevNexus, which I've traveled tens of thousands of miles since then, but it was recently. It's on this channel. Go watch that video. Not now. Don't do it now. We're busy. We're doing something. But after, maybe you go watch that. So anyway, you've seen this cartoon. It is perfect, right? It makes good sense. Okay, so still a very small number of maintainers can maintain a very important project. Did you see the whole thing around what was that library that this guy in Russia created? And it's a Node package, a Node.js package, and he actually went to prison for assorted reasons. And what happened? God, what was that package? There's a whole thing. It's one guy, one human being. It was a polyfill kind of thing. It allowed you to take your existing. It allowed you to take code that was targeting the newer versions of JavaScript and then transpile it down to something that would run in older environments. That's what it was. I forget the actual project name, but just super important. It's used by if it's not used directly, it's used by countless other projects that then transitively bring it in, right? Okay. Still, a very small number of maintainers can maintain a very important, critical piece of software for people, and so we have to understand that this, in some cases, is the reality that we live in. We have to work out ways to encourage people to continue to contribute in that environment. And I'm not certain that the open core business model plus VC investing mechanism is the right or only way to go about doing that. So open core, obviously, is that, wow, okay. Open core, here, what is open core? is a business model for the monetization of commercially produced open source software. It coined in 2008, the open core model primarily involves offering a core or limited feature version of a software product as free and open source, while offering a commercial version or add-ons as proprietary. So yeah, okay, we know that. I'm looking for like good examples. GitLab, is that a good example? I guess that's a good example. They have a community edition. Kafka, which is the open source core to the company, but they also have the platform, right? Okay, Cassandra. Okay, so there's lots, right? Oracle's MySQL, GitLab CE, Neo4j CE, Redis is under a 3-clause BSD open source license. Okay, so you get that. So this article is getting further and further away. Let's see. So that's why I say when you're building a library, that's why I say when you're building a library or tool or product, you have to understand what your plan is for that product. Okay. There are also decisions that affect. Oh, this is good. We talk about very different choices, and you'll need to look ahead further than just the next 18 months, which is harder to do than it was 10 years ago. Yeah, to the extent that we can look ahead, I think things are changing so much more volatilely, more in a more volatile way today. So yeah, having any sort of confidence in the trajectory of a project today in today's market, I think would be a lot harder, a lot more dubious than it might have been even 10 years ago, right? Okay. As we look at connectivity across a large number of things, open source might be the only real way. Sure, yeah. Look at old enterprise service businesses, oh yeah, very good point. Look at old enterprise service buses or integration systems, right? And so we talked about these when we looked at Spring integration. Spring integration defeats, it undoes the need for these relics, right? And how it was all about the multitude of connectors between different systems. MuleSoft basically nailed that in the enterprise space by having a really good system that lets lots of different people contribute to the same model. If you look at Terraform from HashiCorp, it's the same sort of idea. There are something like 3,000 providers and modules in the Terraform ecosystem that let you connect almost any system you want into a common language for orchestration and provisioning. That's true. That Terraform is so useful now that actually, if you want to deploy Azure Spring apps on Microsoft Azure, you can use Terraform. Right? It's like a standard input language for describing systems. So in a sense, you need an open source model for working in these spaces if you're going to do anything that's an aggregate or ecosystem like play. So open source is how you glue things together. If you don't mind gluing things together, maybe it's not important. Open source is going to continue to be super important for everybody. I think the layering of technology is going to continue to grow. Open source is where you'll see tons of innovation. Okay, it's not going to slow down. Also, maintaining existing projects in the open source world, the existential worry is always long-term sustainability. And that is especially true if you plan to host your project as a part of an open source foundation. Such organizations have models of engagement to push projects into particular contributor models. For example, if more than half of your maintainers work for a particular company and that company goes away, it's likely your product won't survive. There's some value to that dichotomy, having to balance sustainability versus being able to create and maintain something that provides substantial value. Most coders will be making their contributions as part of their job, not out of charity. Okay, good. Okay, so OSS projects live and die by the communities. In your opinion, what's the key to success for building and maintaining a vibrant community for a commercial open source project? Okay, here's okay. I think there are two keys here. First, you've got to make the use case of your project abundantly clear from the beginning. We are going to do project X to solve problem Y, and problem Y has to be a real problem that people in your community actually have. Fair enough. Now, what you're doing could be similar to what everybody else is doing, but maybe you're doing it 10 times faster or in a really viable way that no one has ever done before. Or there's a problem people are trying to solve in many ways, and you're trying to provide a standardized solution. In any event, you've got to be very clear about what your project is actually solving for. Fair, yes. So messaging, okay, I guess that's DevRel right there. Second, you need to build some kind of mechanism that encourages engagement to bring in other people that want to improve your project and might even contribute code. Or they might be willing to talk to you about the direction your project is going. By the way, having a project that is interesting enough for people to want to contribute code is great. But I would argue that having a project that's interesting enough that people are willing to just do documentation, like, which is for a lot of people kind of boring, and if they're still willing to do that, that's a winning project, right? Second, okay, so let's see. You also want people who are willing to be champions of your project. Hi, that's me. I'm a champion of a number of projects: Kotlin, Java, and of course Spring. We'll talk about how your project successfully provided value for them. That's true. I mean, I've literally written books. I'm a champion. And this is the thing, by the way. People like me, like I was doing it for free. They hired me to do the job, but I love Spring. I was using it before. I've always been a big fan, right? For 20 years, I've been using it. You know, I was doing the advocacy of Spring for free back in 2008, 2009, 2010. Okay. I use Project X to solve my problem, and you should too because it's great. Super important. Absolutely. You'll notice that most open source projects that have become successful did so because somebody else somewhere was talking about how great it was. Yes. Okay. So he's defining like developer relations here, people. This is super important. This is coming from somebody who knows. So we start by being really succinct and clear about what you're solving, then build a collection of fans, champions, heroes, and ambassadors, or whatever you want to call them, who will advocate for the value of what you created. By the way, advocate right there. Super important. My title, if you've ever seen me do a presentation, well, I'm sorry, but if you have, you know, I call myself a Spring developer advocate, right? I chose, like I had some options and I chose that. And actually that's what Adam wanted, right? When I first took this job. We haven't changed my title. I've been promoted, of course, but I am still a Spring developer advocate and not an evangelist, right? And this is actually one of those brilliant things that Adam did in the very beginning. He's like, no, advocate makes more sense. Okay. Community building. You have to realize a community has strata, layers, basically. There's a number of people who are potential users who come in through your landing page or peruse your documentation, but haven't tried the project. Then there is a collection of people who actually kick the tires, but maybe your project didn't fit their use case. Fair. And then there's different subset of people that have tried the project and were successful. Of those people, there might be a subsection who are experts. And if you're lucky, maybe they answer questions in the community about how to be successful. And from there, maybe there's even a smaller subset of people who actually tell you how to make your project better. People who want to be deeply engaged, contribute to it, or tell you, I'd use your product so much more if it also did A, B, and C. Yeah. And by the way, the Spring projects, we are blessed, right? Having been around for so long, the only reason we're able to endure is because we have so many people in all those different stratas and all those different groups, right? So many people that are vested in making Spring better because they love it. And that was me, by the way. I became a contributor to Spring because I loved it. It solved problems for me, and I felt like it would be making my life better if it was better. You know how cool it is to have a third-party project that isn't something you created align with your goals. You love it so much that it aligns with your goals and your outcomes. Okay. Let's see. By the way, what are your favorite open source projects, friends? I'm just curious. Besides Spring Boot. I mean, I'm assuming you love Spring Boot. I hope you do. Okay, so you have to understand all these different layers in the community and how to manage them. Keep in mind that more is not always better. Sometimes a very small contributor pool, as long as it's tightly focused around the area you want to improve, can make a big difference, bigger difference than having 100 contributors add one pull request apiece. Very true. Quality, not quantity. Okay, so this looks, yeah, we're close. We're good. We're doing good, people. Scaling an open source startup to the enterprise. What's the key difference maker that ensures an OSS startup can scale to the enterprise? Well, figuring out who is actually going to pay will probably help. Too often I see people thinking that they're going to make a lot of money by having lots and lots of small accounts, that there's going to be 1 million developers paying $5 every month. Well, maybe, but quite often it's really hard to satisfy that audience, and it's really hard to maintain support channels for that volume of people. Very good point. Again, if you want to scale, you've got to get it to the point where people have their incentives lined up with the project, right? So we have on the Spring team are lucky. We have scores of people that are not on the Spring team, you know, just out in the world, in the global world, that feel like their day is better if they help somebody else get something done with Spring. So, if you look at our Stack Overflow presence, the Spring team is there. We tend the Stack Overflow garden, right? But as often as not, so do other people, and they've got built-in incentives because Stack Overflow gamifies that work. But also, they just happen to love Spring and they know it and they feel like they can contribute to it, right? So we've grown not just our contributors, but also our the people that are supporting the other people who want to be contributors or use it or whatever, right? You've got champions for other champions. Okay. Okay, so that's why the enterprise model is so much more popular. Instead of 1 million people, there are 1,000 companies on the Fortune 1000 that could be using your technology, and they'll be paying a lot more than $5 a month! Exclamation mark, right? He's not wrong. Enterprise, if you can, as the old joke goes, if you can dodge a wrench, you can sell enterprise software, right? It's really hard though. Like, basically, what it means is selling enterprise software. It's really, really hard. There's a long life cycle to enterprise software, but the payday, my goodness, my friends, that payday is huge. Okay, so you need to ask, who is the actual buying audience for your product as opposed to the user audience? Understanding that most commonly in the developer tool space, the price for developer tools winds up going to zero in the end. Anyway, even if you're an IDE, right there, that's what it is. That's right there. That's why every good framework you've ever used is free or open source, right? They've commoditized frameworks, right? Infrastructure, on the other hand, is not. So your cloud platform, your database, whatever, Oracle still makes a killing off of their database. Infrastructure, right? And the reason is because you can't sell to developers today. They're just not interested in buying anything, right? If it requires a license per seat to use something for developers, they don't buy. But if you go to to the operations team, ops, the IT, and you say, hey, I've got your next database. Well, let's go play some golf and I'll talk to you about it, right? Those people have budget and they'll spend if it purports to solve a problem that they think they have. Okay, so from a business model perspective, you've got to understand, if I'm going to make things as popular and as easy as possible for practitioners, and I'm going to make it open source with high trust, how am I going to fund all the other pieces that need to happen? At that point, you need to make sure that you have the things that matter for enterprise buyers: governance, compliance, audit controls, observability, cross-platform connectivity, and so on. You've got to understand the difference between a user and a buyer. See, I am very happy when I get a chance to talk to our buyers, right? The people that pay VMware for stuff. But I treat them like users because, again, think about what VMware does. They give me the ability to champion our open source Apache 2 license technology. I don't make money. I cost the company money, right? Like it costs. I'm a goodwill. I'm a good faith sort of representative of the project, and my hope is to help people find success in terms of Spring. But I tend to cater to the users who are not necessarily buyers, or rather, they might incidentally be a buyer, but that's not it's not a predicate for me to be interested in talking to somebody, right? I just want to help people who are using it, whether they pay us money or not, right? And that's a lofty, charitable, wonderful position to be in. Not everybody has enough money that they can afford to keep somebody like me around to do that. And so you got to know your market, right? For smaller companies, it may not make any sense to cater to users, right? I also, like I said, I do customer meetings all the time, right? But they're not my priority, right? I don't have a priority, really. I go to audiences that want to hear from me, is basically it. Working that out ahead of time gives you a really big head start on people that may be approaching things a bit more naively. Realistically, there's a lot of continual self-reflection you need to do over time to figure out where that line sits for your business model and your project. Okay. Okay, so I think, yeah, okay. Let's just wrap it up here. Going back to the first topic, this is also the point where you need to think about these large cloud providers that might just take your open source project and run it as a service. This is where defensibility becomes important. If you know your buyer is, if you know who your buyer is and what features they're willing to pay for, you make sure those are the features that are hard for cloud service providers to replicate. So you want to make sure your product or tool works across cloud providers seamlessly, or that your product has compliance in a particular region where other cloud providers find it difficult to operate. Things like making sure your tool has the type of observability and integrated metrics that are really hard for cloud providers to issue from their own system. There's a collection of different things to immediately consider to build a defensive model against being raided by some of these huge cloud providers and vendors. Raided, that's a great word to think about it, plundered, if you think about it, right? That's a great way to describe it. That was, I used to work for him. I started this video by, telling people I used to work. I feel even more proud that I work for that guy. He's really smart, really, really brilliant. That was a good article. I learned something. Who learned something else? Did you learn anything new from that? I did. I think a lot of it was born by our experiences in industry. I'm sure a lot of it was sort of intuitive, but just to see it all sort of so succinctly put and explained and reasoned about in this article was great. Thank you, Adam. It was just like having our Monday morning sync up a decade ago. I think he left the organization like in 2013, so it might actually be a decade since I've had the privilege of working for him. But he's a good guy. Okay, people, well, that was fun. Do we have time for another one? We got time for one more article before I have to go catch a flight. So let's close other tabs to the right. Okay, and okay, couple of things. Where's that? Oh, what's the Amazon Prime? Do we want to do that right now? Microservices. There's a really great article. I don't know if we have enough time. We might have to do this one later today or something. Yeah, let's save this one for later. This one's really good, right? This one's like crazy good. Amazon Prime Video, the company, from Amazon, they talked about how they moved to a monolith. And they did it by getting rid of, among other things, for a very particular issue. And they're very good to point out that it's a very specific tool and very particular workflow. They got rid of their Amazon Lambdas and their functions. And their Amazon, they moved away from Amazon Cloud. They're still using some cloud, but they got rid of all the distributed components and moved to a monolith. And they said it's been wonderful for them, right? Because they've consolidated logic, reduced the runtime footprint, all that kind of stuff. So a really interesting discussion. One I want to dive into, but I'm afraid we just don't have the time right now. And I've got to go, I got to go run for my flight in like 10 minutes. So, all right, my friends, who got something out of it? I think this is fun. We'll do another one. I'm speaking at Devox Greece in Athens tomorrow on the weekend. So if you're in Athens, Greece tomorrow, come say hi. It'll be fine. Good stuff. All right, my friends. Bye-bye. Have a good weekend if I don't talk to you.